Let's talk about the time I got mugged in Bogotá. Hi all, I'm Isrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. Today I've got a bit of a story for you as I wanted to recount the time I got mugged in Bogotá and had my phone stolen from me. There's actually a bit to it as there was a bit of drama even beyond the mugging itself, so hopefully I can shed some light on this kind of situation so you know how it might go down if it happens to you. Of course, ideally it won't, and if you want to know how to avoid these situations to begin with, I've actually already done 2 videos about safety in Colombia, which you can find links for in the description. For now though, the story starts right at the end of my previous 6-month stay in Colombia. I'd managed up until now to not ever be mugged or even have anyone approach me with malintent, so I guess you could say I developed a bit of an invincibility complex, or at the very least felt like the threat of a mugging was hugely overstated by people. So on this night, which I believe was during the last or second last week of my stay, I was out having dinner in central Bogotá at a place called City U, which is basically a student accommodation complex that happens to have some public restaurants and shops attached to it. This place is definitely quite safe even at night. It's heavily monitored, so if you're just hanging out in the complex itself, you're unlikely to run into any trouble. Where I ran into trouble, however, was on a street not too far from this accommodation. One thing I can say about Bogotá, and really most cities in Colombia for that matter, is that the level of safety in any given area can change quite suddenly depending on the street or even the block you're on. Whilst you can definitely have districts that are entirely safe and districts that are entirely dangerous, I'd say most areas, especially in central Bogotá, tend to be a mix. And that was definitely the case for where I was that night. Anyway, I'd been to this complex for dinner a few times as it was within walking distance from my apartment. By now, I felt like I'd remembered the directions back to my apartment, so on this particular night, I decided not to bother with Google Maps to guide me. After walking a couple of blocks or so though, I'd already veered off my usual route by accident, so I quickly gave in and got Google Maps to help me get back on track. So I'm looking at Google Maps and the line that it's given me is telling me to turn right onto this pedestrian avenue that looks pretty safe, you know, even though it was nighttime. The avenue was well lit, there were crowds of people, and I think I even saw a few security guards around. Now Google Maps was suggesting that I walk a couple of 100 meters or so down this avenue, and then to make a few turns to eventually get back to my apartment. I noticed, however, that there was another street straight ahead of me, and looking at it on maps, it seemed like a much more direct route with less turns, so I decided to take that street instead. And this right here is where it all began. Now this street was actually a main road, so I wrongly assumed that it should be safe. You know, when you think of muggings, you usually think of dodgy alleyways like in Batman's origin story, or really just generally every story you've ever heard about this kind of thing, let's be honest. So I'm looking at this main road, and whilst I'm not seeing any regular pedestrians and it's dimly lit, there are still a lot of cars going by, and so I'm thinking, you know, it's a little risky, but I've never been mugged before in Colombia, so should be fine. Within a minute or two though, I start to notice what appeared to be a number of homeless people and beggars. I really didn't think much of it because up until now beggars had never posed a threat of any kind. You know, they might be persistent in asking for money, but they generally have no intention of robbing you. With that in mind, when someone actually approached me here moments later, I really didn't think much of it, even though they were yelling, "Give me money," quite viciously. You know, I just kept walking along and was just like, "Ah, lo siento," and really didn't pay him any mind. I guess I may have just gotten so used to people approaching me that I kind of switched to cruise control whenever it happened and always had this very automatic response. I know that might sound a little harsh, but one thing you'll learn when you go to Colombia is that if you give money to every single beggar that asks you for it, you'll literally go broke. Well, okay, slight exaggeration, but my point is, beyond the odd occasion, it's not something that you could easily sustain. Anyway, it did eventually get through that this guy wasn't asking me to give him money, but telling me to, so I thought, okay, I have a small bit of cash in my pocket, I'll give it to him if it means he leaves me alone. So I reach into my jeans pocket for a note, but this happens to be the same pocket I'm keeping my phone in, and so when I begin to take the cash out, my phone gets pushed up slightly, as well, just the tiniest bit, but enough to see the top edge of it. Well, as soon as the guy saw this, suddenly the cash wasn't enough anymore. He basically started demanding me for the phone, and look, I don't know how you'd react in this situation, but for me, my instinct isn't to just immediately give away my phone to anyone who asks for it. Of course, this is the best thing to do in this situation to preserve your safety, but alas, I was still hesitant, and I guess when the guy noticed I wasn't going to instantly comply without a second thought, he just kind of helped himself to my pockets and grabbed everything out, along with a drink bottle I was holding that I got from Juan Valdez as a gift for my sister. So clearly he was just going for everything I had on me, but he really wasn't sorting through it as he was robbing me. It was just a quick lucky dip into the jeans pockets, grabbing everything out, snatching the drink bottle from me, and then he was on his way. It wasn't until he was crossing the road that he started sorting through it all, and for the stuff he didn't want, like my debit card, he quite violently threw it on the ground. I think this is the point where I actually started to have an emotional reaction from it all, because during the mugging, I was just sort of in disbelief that this was happening to me, that I wasn't sure how to feel, but when I saw how carelessly he just chucked away my belongings over his shoulder as he walked away, that right there got me fuming. Like, I just let this guy rob me, and then he has to go and be even more of a jerk about it and further demean me by throwing my stuff onto the road and making me come and get it. Like, dude, even just talking about this now, I'm actually starting to feel visceral rage. In hindsight, though, I do find it interesting that there was no point in this whole incident where I felt fear or any kind of trauma afterwards. It really was just pure, unadulterated rage. I honestly don't know if I've ever been this angry in my life before. What I find most interesting though is that as frustrating as it was to be without a phone, that really wasn't the main cause of my anger. What really had me stirred up was just the injustice of it all and the way he treated me. I mean, I know it sounds weird, but honestly, if he just robbed me a little more politely, like letting me give him my stuff instead of snatching it and handing back the stuff he didn't want instead of throwing it on the ground, I'd of course still be frustrated, but I don't know if I'd have the same level of anger. Now, I'm sorry to bring up Batman for a second time, but it really is the best thing I can compare this to. Like, you know how after Bruce's parents get murdered in the alleyway, he gets overtaken with nothing but pure violent animosity and dedicates his whole life to vengeance? Like, just the sight of even the smallest injustice from the pettiest of criminals makes his blood boil. That's pretty much how I was feeling after this incident. I mean, obviously I didn't have anything tragic like that, but again, I was just so fixated on this injustice. All I could think about was how I wanted this guy to be caught. Like, I seriously cared more about this guy getting arrested than about getting my phone back. It was so weird. Anyway, I obviously checked the Find My Phone website to see if I could track it as soon as I was back to my apartment, as I was still determined to get it back amidst all the rage, but unfortunately the guy turned it off soon after stealing it, which meant it wasn't trackable. Worth mentioning that I've made another video about how to avoid this from happening so that even after getting your phone stolen, the thief won't likely be able to turn it off straight away. So if that interests you, you can check it out here or in the link in the description. Anyway, after realizing I couldn't track it, I of course disabled all my accounts from the phone via my laptop and then just spent a good amount of time pacing back and forth in my apartment, seething about it all. Eventually though, I decided to go down to the security guard at the front desk of the apartment block to ask him if he could call the police for me. And this is really where the frustration began to escalate further, as I soon came to realize that a lot of people in Colombia have very little sympathy for this kind of thing. I kind of got the sense that in Colombia, if you get robbed, the default response is, it was your fault. Like, even if people don't say that directly, it's sort of implied in the lack of any kind of sympathy when you tell people about what happened. Now, don't get me wrong, I can fully own up to my mistake and say that I shouldn't have taken the risk to walk down that street, but at the same time, when you've just had your phone stolen and someone violate you, you've kind of moved past the revelation that you took a dumb risk, and at that point, you just want a little bit of kindness from people about it, you know? But yeah, sadly, that is not what I got from most people. In fact, when I asked the security guard if he could call the police, he continuously refused to, citing that there was no point as they wouldn't likely show up. At this point though, I honestly didn't care if there was only a 10% chance that they would show up. I was truly just so fixated on doing everything in my power for justice to be served. Like, the mindset I was in that moment was that if I gave up, it would be like declaring defeat, and I was just so determined to not let this thief get away with it that that wasn't an option to me. So yeah, I know I sound like a Karen at this point, but I was getting a little frustrated with the security guard. He was literally just watching Netflix as I'm there begging for him to call the police, and he keeps refusing to. Eventually though, I convinced them, so he calls them up, tells them what's happened, and then tells me that they said they'd be on their way. Needless to say, they never showed up. Now, I honestly didn't think they would, but I still wanted to try, you know? I figured that people who just give up then and there are part of the reason why crime continues to prevail, so I still wanted to give it a shot. Anyway, I was waiting for about an hour, and during that time, another guest walks in and he starts talking to the security guard, who tells him about the incident. And once again, no sympathy at all. He really just gives me this sucks to be you kind of response and told me I should give up. So yeah, great moral support so far. And I mean, yeah, I probably should have, but again, that's not the sort of thing I want to hear right after the incident. The next day, maybe, but right now, I was on a mission. So after waiting forever, I figured, you know what, if the police aren't going to show up for me, I'll go to them. So I go back to my apartment and order an Uber via my laptop to the nearest police station that's open. Annoyingly, the station in the district where I was mugged wasn't open at that time of night, so I just had to go to the closest open one I could find. As determined as I was, I had admittedly lost a lot of hope at this point, so I really didn't think this outing would yield any results. It was more just a last-ditch attempt, so I could say I'd tried everything. And just as I expected, the police there weren't any help. They just told me that it was outside their jurisdiction and that I should visit the one in the jurisdiction where the incident took place, which you'll remember was closed at night, so I really was out of luck. It humbled me to have to admit, but there really was nothing more I could do at this point to get my phone back, so I ordered an Uber back to my apartment via my laptop, which I brought with me. I had to use one of the policeman's Wi-Fi hotspots, which was the whole thing and really served as the icing on the cake of this exhaustive night. But yeah, that was about it for that night. It was frustrating to never see justice served, but this story does actually have a good ending eventually. Basically, I'd applied for travel insurance before coming to Colombia, which meant that there was a silver lining in all of this. See, I was planning from the beginning of the year to upgrade my Google Pixel 5, which is the phone that got stolen, to a Google Pixel 7 as soon as I got back to Australia. Now before, I would have had to pay full price for this, but now that I'd had my Pixel 5 stolen, it meant that I'd be able to claim that under my insurance and get credited the value of it, which I could use to get a nice discount on the next phone. Of course, however, some bureaucracy was required. Essentially, the insurance company wanted a police report to prove the phone had been stolen, so a few days later, I head out to the station in the jurisdiction where I wanted to go originally. When I got there though, the security guard wouldn't let me in because, and you won't believe this, they were having their lunch break. Now look, I admit, I don't know a whole lot about how police stations run, but dude, a lunch break. Like, you think all the crime's just gonna stop for an hour to let you finish your sandwich? Far out, man, and in central Bogotá, no less. I mean, hey, I'm sure police have lunch breaks, but that doesn't mean you close the whole operation for an hour and have no one available to help. So I come back an hour later and finally get to talk to someone at this station, but as you might imagine, it couldn't just be that simple, as soon as I'd explained it to them, they told me that they couldn't provide me with a report, because apparently all reports for phone theft have to be filed at this one station on the other end of the city. So a day or so later, I head there and finally get a physical report. I do have to shout out the lady who wrote the report there, as she honestly was the first person who actually showed any kind of sympathy about the whole ordeal outside of a few people I knew personally. So yeah, thank you to that person who will probably never watch this. I must say that I find it interesting that when they wrote up this report, they told me that it wasn't just a bit of paper for me, but that they'd actually open a case from it and assign a person to investigate it. Now, I wasn't kidding myself. By now I knew that this was a lost cause. I mean, with the amount of stolen phone reports they get, who knows that they actually follow through with them. It's probably just like, oh look, another missing phone report. But honestly, at this point, I was just happy to get the report to show the insurance agent. Anyway, if you do happen to get your phone stolen in Bogotá, I'd still say it's worth filing a report here, as I did. As like I said before, it's still better for people to go through a justice system than just to give up altogether regardless of the outcome. Alas, that's where this story ends and later became the partial influence for this channel, because now that I've learnt these lessons the hard way, I figured I could help other foreigners avoid these situations to begin with. And to that end, feel free to check out the 2 videos I've made so far about safety in Colombia, including one where I specifically list some measures you can take to keep your phone safe from thieves to begin with. If you have been mugged though, I also want to say something to you that I wish was said to me more, and that is that I'm sorry to hear it happen to you. I sympathize with you. I hope you're feeling okay. And if there is any advice I can provide you regarding this whole process, leave a comment and I'd be happy to help in any way I can. I can only speak from my own experience, but at the very least, just know that I empathize with your frustration. With all that said, I hope you got something out of this video, even if it was just some mild entertainment. But until my next video, I'll see you around. Ciao.